over the last 13 years, Jonathan Martin and I have produced some 700 programs, which are currently being seen in something like 120 countries worldwide. Collectively as a team, we've got a pretty unique blend of experience which covers filmed history from 1896 to the present day. And in knowing where that material is located, its pedigree, its applicability to the storytelling, our ability to bring in expert writers on this particular series. The first scripts were written by Lieutenant Colonel Charles Messenger, who himself has written over 20 books on military history and is well respected worldwide. And we were able to base the 6 hours of World War I in colour on that original framework which he drew up for us.
Well, we're talking about, obviously, an enormous subject.
Between 1914 and 1918, some 65 million men took up arms. 10 million died in battle.
One had to make a large number of decisions because you could go in a very technical way, you could go in a very much more personalised eyewitness account type of way. We originally conceived it as being a completely balanced series, and we avoided, because it would have made it so cumbersome to cover the whole century with eyewitnesses, etc., we tended to make it a chronological history theme, but having obviously to go into themes like air warfare in the First World War or whatever.
The Imperial War Museum in London was of particular interest because so much of the material, which is held at Duxford in Cambridgeshire, has never been transferred from either safety film to magnetic formats, which effectively meant that a lot of the material, probably up to 75% that went into our programs, had never been previously shown on television. Now this was a great revelation, and some of the material that was found was just absolutely magnificent and was in very, very good condition. It enabled us to think very seriously that when the technology became available, it would make a marvellous colorized series.
I was the producer-director on the original Century of Warfare project from which we derived World War I in colour, and at that stage I was working with the original historians to develop the scripts, and then with the researchers. Nobody has seen the war in colour before, and I think for me that was the extraordinary thing. It just suddenly brought it to life. It really emphasised to you that these were real people, that these were real events. It wasn't all happening in black and white. It was a real war involving real people.
My own grandfather used to regale me on odd occasions with stories of lying about his age to join up in a great jingoistic fervour, of going to France and being at Hill 60 with Lieutenant Woolley when he won the Victoria Cross. In a matter of 3 or 4 days, some 350 British troops lost their lives at Hill 60, and just not more than a dozen emerged unscathed. They were caught in a crossfire from not just German troops ahead of them, but also from both sides. And later in World War I, he was gassed and declared dead, and actually awoke during, I suppose, his own burial service from under a white sheet. And had it been a few hours, he may even have been buried. So I feel that his good fortune in being posted back to the UK probably saved his life, and I'm probably sitting here talking to you as a result of that life-saving experience.
The decision was made that we should try to personalise the series much more by including eyewitness accounts and bringing in readings from poetry or descriptions of the battles, of the background.
Tomorrow morning, early, we go over the top and hope to give the Boche hell. I have every confidence in my battalion. They will fight to the finish if necessary. I told them that there was only one good Boche, and that was at Denton.
I must say that our thanks would go to Dan Chambers at Channel 5, who was instrumental in exercising a light touch to achieve the extra dynamics, the extra elements which we thought would be suitable for, more appropriate perhaps for a 21st century audience.
We're now talking about events which happened almost 90 years ago, and most of the people concerned are either extremely elderly or dead. There can be a bit of a discordance between how they look today and how they sound today and the events which they're describing, and we had to be very aware of that. On occasions it can be very moving, but also for a modern audience it can also set up a certain sort of almost an element of being unable to believe that this was the same person.
I had about 5 seconds to make my mind up. I shot him above the ankle and above the knee. I brought him down. I didn't kill him.
I think the interviews and the new maps and the extracts and the letters and diary notes, I think that just opens out the understanding for a lot of people.
We are talking about something which was a long, long time ago, and the closer you can get to the reality, the better. And the reality was obviously that it all took place in colour.
For the last 10 years we haven't been able to really take full advantage because the technical backup that we need to make such a colorized series just wasn't really refined enough.
One of the interesting things which came out of the colorizing was obviously the care which we had to take to get the uniforms, the flags, all of that detail right. And right from the beginning we were amassing as much information as we could about the correct uniforms.
The hues, for example, between the Russian uniforms and the German uniforms and the British and American uniforms, all subtly different, and the team have had to make these quite distinctive on screen for the benefit of historians and viewers who obviously are familiar with the colours and medals and insignias and so on. And this has been an enormous effort.
In the course of production we were continually being sent sample colour renders which we could approve and show to experts where necessary. We were continually being asked questions about what colour flag would that have been, or what troops were these. One of the factors which we considered once we'd made the editorial decision that the main part of the series would be the eyewitness route is that there are a number of crucial points, such as the introduction of the tank or aircraft, which we would not be able to cover in that way to the satisfaction of the more historically interested military interested market. So we then made another conscious decision to take certain of those events, particularly events which would not have been filmed, like the raid on Zeebrugge, and do a much more detailed computer graphic interpretation, reconstruction of those. And that is what one now sees on the DVD disc, is a number of key points in either the tactics, the strategy, or the machinery of war, which were not filmed in the sort of detail which would interest a certain part of the market. What we're looking at here is how good television today is at putting across a historical event like the First World War and giving people some impression of how it would have felt and would have looked if you had been there.
When we first started talking to the Imperial War Museum about the black and white footage which they supplied to us, they showed us some material. In fact, the keeper, Dr. Roger Smither, showed us some material which was really quite stunning, and which the researchers there had found, which included British artillery bringing up very, very light 12-pounder guns to the front quite early in the war. Before Lloyd George became Prime Minister, the Liberal government in those days, in the early stage of the war, had failed to provide the troops at the front with enough artillery, shells and ammunition. And in some cases, in those early stages, they found themselves being rationed. And the shots of the Royal Horse Artillery bringing up their 12-pounder guns at the gallop, and in some cases German shells landing in the midst of artillery columns, and people literally just being blown to smithereens, were pictures which I shall never forget.
I think that for me, in some ways, the most interesting sequences are in some cases, the rather well-known ones of men going forward in the trenches, the faces, the knowledge of what they were about to be subjected to. And I still find that very moving, and even more moving now that you see them in colour.
It's very difficult for us to really totally comprehend the absolute abject misery that many of those poor troops found themselves in. And I think that the series will serve a very, very useful purpose in bringing home to worldwide audiences something which they would only normally see maybe on evening news bulletins, where here were millions of people, in the case of the Western trenches, locked into a pretty small area of land, just slogging it out in the most appalling conditions. And had there been television in those years, there wouldn't have been a war, because public opinion wouldn't have allowed it to happen. But just literally 20 or 30 miles from the south coast of Britain, hundreds, thousands, possibly millions of Germans, Frenchmen, British troops, Americans, were just locked in this huge quagmire, and sometimes tens of thousands of them were killed in a single day.
One has to keep coming back to the sheer scale of the killing on the Western Front. It was a very small area. When you go to visit the war graves today, you suddenly realise, A, that it all took place over only a few hundred miles, and the sheer numbers of people killed in that tiny area, and the fact, from the British point of view, that it was taking place, as Philip said, just 20 miles away from the coast of, from Dover. You could hear the guns.
Tonight, I may sleep and dream of you where a Boche officer never dreamt of the trouble awaiting him at dawn. Think of the hundreds of tanks. Think of the hundreds of guns, all got up quietly and secretly. I can't get over the wonder of it.
As the programmes have started to take shape, both the executives at Channel 5 and ourselves have sometimes not been able to get people out of our offices because they've never seen World War I in colour before, and they've just been absolutely glued to the television sets and wouldn't leave. And if this is any indication at all of the appeal of seeing this material for the first time, I think it will introduce to a new generation who are, if you like, in a sense, colour literate. It will introduce to those young people to just the indescribable, unbelievable horrors that their grandfathers and great-grandfathers went through in just barely 100 years ago.